Happy Tuesday, everybody! Right? I cannot believe this is the start of our third really full, I know it's technically our fourth, but our third full week of assignments with this virtual crazy thing that we've transitioned to. And I just want to give you guys a moment of props. You have done an amazing job transitioning and doing this. So many of you are successfully completing your assignments with very little technical assistance, and I appreciate you guys for doing this. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this so this video is not too long. Yesterday, we started our Metamorphosis short story by Franz Kafka, right? We learned a little bit about his background, and then we got into the first couple paragraphs of the short story, and you did an assignment. So if you have not completed that assignment, I would go ahead, pause this video, go back to your team's general announcement page, find yesterday's assignment, and complete that first, and then make your way back to this video. Alright, so we had our main dude, Gregor Samsa. He woke up from a troubled dream, but then found himself changed into a horrible vermin, right? And he explained the change that he noticed. So he never directly says what vermin, and this was a vocabulary word for you yesterday. He never directly says which vermin he has been turned into. So one of the questions yesterday had you look at the descriptions and figure out what you think, right? This armor-like back, and he could see his brown belly slightly domed and divided by arches into sections, and he had these little legs, right? So in your brain, what type of bug is he? Yesterday, as you watched the video, you may have seen these highlighted words, which then turned into your vocabulary words for the assignment. That is going to continue today. So in the reading, be paying attention to those. So Gregor is dealing with this transformation, right? And then he's like, oh man, I gotta go to work, and he starts really stressing about having to get up and go to work. Maybe a little more than he is worrying about this transformation he has undergone, which is definitely interesting, okay? He talks about how the weather is outside, and then he gets into talking about his job, right? He goes into what a strenuous career it is that I have chosen. Right? He's a traveling salesman, in and out all the time, never being able to really make deep connections with people, always traveling. He hates how early he has to get up, right? He said it makes you stupid to have to wake up this early all the time. And he's like, I know not everybody has to do it, right? I see my bosses sitting and having breakfast in the morning when I go over. He talks very kind of negatively about his boss, right? He doesn't seem too happy in his position, but he definitely has to work in that position. Something to do with his parents' debt in the past, right? So we're getting some breadcrumbs, some hints, maybe a little foreshadowing about Gregor and his future, and how he maybe has come to this moment of waking up and being transformed into a vermin. Okay, so as we get into the reading for today, which is going to start with Gregor looking over at his clock, right, and seeing that it is much later than he thought it was. Follow along with me. You'll see that there is no more watermark because I did upgrade the product. I like it a little bit. Here we go. Gregor, and he looked over at the alarm clock ticking on the chest of drawers. God in heaven, he thought. It was 6:30, and the hands were quietly moving forward. It was even later than 7:30, more like 7:15. Had the alarm clock not rung? He could see from the bed that it had been set for 4 o'clock as it should have been. It certainly must have rung. Yes, but was it possible to quietly sleep through that furniture-rattling noise? True, he had not slept peacefully, but probably all the more deeply because of that. What should he do now? The next train went at 7. If he were to catch that, he would have to rush like mad. The collection of samples was still not packed, and he did not at all feel particularly fresh and lively. And even if he did catch the train, he would not avoid his boss's anger, as the office assistant would have been there to see the 5 o'clock train go. He would have put in his report about Gregor not being there a long time ago. The office assistant was the boss's man, spineless and with no understanding. What about if he reported sick? But that would be extremely strained and suspicious, as in 15 years of service Gregor had never once yet been ill. His boss would certainly come round with the doctor from the medical insurance company, accuse his parents of having a lazy son, and accept the doctor's recommendation not to make any claim, as the doctor believed that no one was ever ill, but that many were work-shy. And what's more, would he have been entirely wrong in this case? Gregor did, in fact, apart from excessive sleepiness after sleeping for so long, feel completely well and even felt much hungrier than usual. He was still hurriedly thinking all of this through, unable to decide to get out of bed when the clock struck 7:15. There was a cautious knock at the door near his head. "Gregor," somebody called. It was his mother. "It's 7:15. Didn't you want to go somewhere?" That gentle voice. Gregor was shocked when he heard his own voice answering. It could hardly be recognized as the voice he had had before. As if from deep inside him there was a painful and uncontrollable squeaking mixed in with it. The words could be made out at first, but then there was a sort of echo which made them unclear, leaving the hearer unsure whether he had heard properly or not. Gregor had wanted to give full answer and explain everything, but in the circumstance contented himself with saying, "Yes, mother, yes, thank you. I'm getting up now." The change in Gregor's voice probably could not be noticed outside through the wooden door, as his mother was satisfied with this explanation and shuffled away. But this short conversation made the other members of the family aware that Gregor, against their expectations, was still at home, and soon his father came knocking at one of the other side doors, gently, but with his fist. "Gregor, Gregor," he called, "what's wrong?" And after a short while he called again with a warning deepness in his voice, "Gregor, Gregor." At the other side door, his sister came plaintively. "Gregor, aren't you well? Do you need anything?" Gregor answered to both sides. "I'm ready now," making an effort to remove all the strangeness from his voice by enunciating very carefully and putting long pauses between each individual word. His father went back to his breakfast, but his sister whispered, "Gregor, open the door, I beg of you." Gregor, however, had no thought of opening the door, and instead congratulated himself for his cautious habit, acquired from his traveling, of locking all doors at night, even when he was at home. The first thing he wanted to do was to get up in peace without being disturbed, to get dressed, and most of all to have his breakfast. Only then would he consider what to do next. As he was well aware that he would not bring his thoughts to any sensible conclusion by laying in bed, he remembered that he had often felt a slight pain in bed, perhaps caused by laying awkwardly, but that had always turned out to be pure imagination, and he wondered how his imaginings would slowly resolve themselves today. He did not have the slightest doubt that the change in his voice was nothing more than the first sign of a serious cold, which was an occupational hazard for a traveling salesman. It was a simple matter to throw off the covers. He only had to blow himself up a little, and they fell off by themselves. But it became difficult after that, especially as he was so exceptionally broad. He would have used his arms and his hands to push himself up, but instead of them he only had all those little legs continuously moving in different directions, and which he was moreover unable to control. If he wanted to bend one of them, then that was the first one that would stretch itself out. And if he finally managed to do what he wanted with that leg, all the others seemed to be set free and would move out painfully. This is something that can't be done alone, Gregor said to himself, so don't keep trying to do it. The first thing he wanted to do was get the lower part of his body out of the bed, but he had never seen this lowest part and could not imagine what it looked like. It turned out to be too hard to move. It went so slowly, and finally, almost in a frenzy, when he carelessly shoved himself forward with all the force he could gather, he chose the wrong direction, hit hard against the lower bedpost, and learned from the burning pain he felt that the lower part of his body might well, at present, be the most sensitive. So, then he tried to get the top part of his body out of the bed first, carefully turning his head to the side. This he managed quite easily, and despite its breadth and its width, the bulk of his body eventually followed slowly in the direction of the head. But when he had at last got his head out of the bed and into the fresh air, it occurred to him that if he let himself fall, it would be a miracle if his head were not injured. So he became afraid to carry on pushing himself forward the same way. And he could not knock himself out now at any price. Better to stay in bed than lose consciousness. Right? So he is deciding, he's trying to figure out how to get out of this dang bed as this big brown vermin with that big domed back and all of those legs. And he's trying to figure out how to do it without hurting himself, right? Without losing consciousness. It took just as much effort to get back to where he had been earlier. But when he lay there sighing and was once more watching his legs as they struggled against each other even harder than before, if that was possible, he could think of no way of bringing peace and order to this chaos. He told himself once more that it was not possible for him to stay in bed, and that the most sensible thing to do would be to get free of it in whatever way he could, at whatever sacrifice. At the same time, though, he did not forget to remind himself that calm consideration was much better than rushing to desperate conclusions. All right, so he's trying to be level-headed here in this situation. I don't know if I would be, but Gregor is. At times like this, he would direct his eyes to the window and look out as clearly as he could, but unfortunately, even the other side of the narrow street was enveloped in morning fog, and the view had little confidence or cheer to offer him. 7 o'clock already, he said to himself when the clock struck again. 7 o'clock, and there's still a fog like this. And he lay there quietly a little while longer, breathing lightly, as if he perhaps expected the total stillness to bring things back to their real and natural state. But then he said to himself, before it strikes 7:15, I'll definitely have to have got properly out of bed. And by then somebody will have come round from work to ask what happened to me as well, as they open up at work before 7 o'clock. And so he set himself to the task of swinging the entire length of his body out of the bed all at one time. If he succeeded in falling out of the bed in this way and kept his head raised as he did so he could probably avoid injuring it. His back seemed to be quite hard, and probably nothing would happen to it falling onto the carpet. His main concern was for the loud noise he was bound to make, and which even through all the doors would probably raise concern, if not alarm. But it was something that had to be risked. He had to get out of this bed, right? When Gregor was already sticking halfway out of the bed, the new method was more of a game than an effort. All he had to do was rock back and forth. It occurred to him how simple everything would be if somebody came to help him. 2 strong people, he had his father and the maid in mind, would have been more than enough. They would only have to push their arms under the dome on his back, peel him away from the bed, bend down with the load, and then be patient and careful as he swung over onto the floor, where hopefully the little legs would find a use. Should he really call for help, though, even apart from the fact that all the doors were locked? Despite all the difficulty he was in, he could not suppress a smile at this thought. After a while, he had already moved so far across that it would have been hard for him to keep his balance if he rocked too hard. The time was now 7:10, and he would have to make a final decision very soon. Then there was a ring at the door of the flat. "That'll be somebody from work," he said to himself, and froze very still and quiet. "They're not opening the door," Gregor said to himself, caught in some nonsensical hope. But then, of course, the maid's firm steps went to the door as ever and opened it. Gregor only needed to hear the visitor's first words of greeting, and he knew who it was, the chief clerk himself. Why did Gregor have to be the only one condemned to work for a company where they immediately become highly suspicious at the slightest shortcoming? Were all employees, every one of them, louts? Was there not one of them who was faithful and devoted, who would go so mad with pangs of consciousness that he couldn't get out of bed if he didn't spend at least a couple of hours in the morning on company business? Was it really not enough to let one of the trainees make inquiries, assuming inquiries were even necessary? Did the chief clerk have to come himself? And did they have to show the whole innocent family that this was so suspicious that only the chief clerk could be trusted to have the wisdom to investigate it? And more, because these thoughts had made him upset than through any proper decision, he swung himself with all his force out of the bed. There was a loud thump, but it wasn't really a loud noise. His fall was softened a little by the carpet, and Gregor's back was also more elastic than he had thought, which made the sound muffled and not too noticeable. He had not held his head carefully enough, though, and hit it as he fell, annoyed and in pain. He turned it and rubbed it against the carpet. So Gregor gets a little worked up here when he finally realizes that his chief clerk, which sounds like somebody important, right? It's not like they just sent maybe somebody who works at the front desk to his house. The way Gregor's talking about this chief clerk, he sounds important, right? And Gregor seems very frustrated at all that the company doesn't seem to trust any of their employees, and even if they're a little late, they're sending someone directly to their house, right? We definitely don't have stuff like that happening anymore. "Something's fallen down in there," said the chief clerk in the room on the left. Gregor tried to imagine whether something of the sort had happened to him today, could ever happen to the chief clerk too. You had to concede that it was possible, but as if in gruff reply to this question, the chief clerk's firm footsteps in his highly polished boots could now be heard in the adjoining room. From the room on the right, Gregor's sister whispered to him to let him know, "Gregor, "The chief clerk is here." "Yes, I know," said Gregor to himself, but without daring to raise his voice loud enough for his sister to hear him. "Gregor," said his father, now from the room to his left, "the chief clerk has come round and wants to know why you didn't leave on the early train. We don't know what to say to him, and anyway, he wants to speak to you personally. So please, open up this door. I'm sure he'll be good enough to forgive this untidiness of your room." Then the chief clerk called, "Good morning, Mr. Samsa." "He isn't well," said his mother to the chief clerk, while his father continued to speak through the door. "He isn't well, please believe me. Why else would Gregor have missed a train? The lad only ever thinks about the business. It nearly makes me cross the way he never goes out in the evenings. He's been in town for a week now, but stayed home every evening. He sits with us in the kitchen and just reads the paper or studies train timetables. His idea of relaxation is working with his fret saw. He's made a little frame, for instance. It only took him 2 or 3 evenings. You'll be amazed how nice it is. It's hanging up in his room. You'll see it as soon as Gregor opens the door. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. We wouldn't have been able to get Gregor to open the door by ourselves. He's so stubborn. And I'm sure he isn't well. He said this morning that he is, but he isn't. I'll be in a moment," said Gregor, slowly and thoughtfully, but without moving, so that he would not miss any word of the conversation. "Well, I can't think of any other way of explaining it, Mrs. Samsa," said the chief clerk. "I hope it's nothing serious, but on the other hand, I must say that if we people in commerce ever become slightly unwell, then, fortunately or unfortunately, as you like, we simply have to overcome it because of business considerations." "Can the chief clerk come in to see you now, then?" asked his father impatiently, knocking at the door again. "No," said Gregor. In the room on the right there followed a painful silence. In the room on the left his sister began to cry. Interesting. So it sounds like, one of the questions today asks you to describe the setting. Question 2. So I really want you to think about the doors in Gregor's room. Where do you think his bed is sitting in the room? Think about what's hanging above his bed. They've mentioned it twice now. And give me a picture in your brain. Okay? Question 1 for today's assignment asks you to give a summary of what has happened so far in the story. Start with the beginning, right? With Gregor waking up and then going all the way to the point where we stopped today, which is his boss coming over, his parents trying to get him to come out of the room, and his sister, him hearing his sister begin to cry. All right, so remember that objective summary means that you are telling me the events that have happened without adding in any of your ideas or opinions or feelings about those events. Question 3 says, who are the 4 characters' names included in the reading so far? I'm actually going to take 4 out. Who are the characters' names included in the reading so far? So who do we know? If they haven't given us a name, so like the sister, I would just write sister for now. Question 4 has to do with indirect characterization. If you guys remember, we talked about indirect characterization in our science fiction unit when we were learning about our characters through their actions and their conversations. So I put the definition here for you so that you can read it again. And then the question that you're answering is, how has Kafka indirectly characterized Gregor so far? What have we learned about his personality based on what thoughts, conversations, and situations he is in? And then the last question, you are going to take these words here and you're going to just write a sentence. You do not have to do anything with the definition. So if in looking at the text you pretty much know what that word means based on context clues, that's awesome, right? That's great. That's what we've been practicing all year. just write me your own sentence. Your sentence could be about how your dog is enunciating his barks more now that everybody is home. All right? As long as you're using that word correctly, it can be used in any sentence. Okay? So this is your whole assignment for today in the readings. Make sure that you submit it using the assignments tab. So again, remember, you are going to open the assignment. You're going to type directly onto it here. Microsoft Teams saves automatically, right? Once you have typed you're going to come up, remember, in the top of your screen, there's going to be a button that says close. You're going to close it because it saves automatically. After you close it, you're then going to look back at the top, this top corner, and there's going to be a submit button. Click the submit button because then that notifies me that you have completed typing in the document. Okay? All right, so again, if you have any questions on that, go back and watch the video from yesterday's assignment. And I hope you guys are kind of getting interested in the story so far. Also, if you want to go ahead and subscribe to the channel on whatever device you're using, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. It'll notify you whenever I upload a video so that you don't have to rely so much on the links that I put in the assignment announcements on Teams. Okay? If you guys have any questions, please message me on Portal. If you are noticing something wonky with your grade, please message me on Portal, right? Not having our normal face-to-face time, we have to do our communications that way. Okay, I want you all to have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I will talk to some of you tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll meet you back here for another reading on Wednesday. Bye.